I'm going to start pretty quickly with a sort of a timeline. Okay, 750 BC, Rome is founded. Where is Rome? Well, naturally, it's right about over there. Rome was founded 750 BC. What does that mean? Not very much. At that time, Rome was a very tiny place. There was a few other things that were going on in the world at the time, which I'm going to include here just for the heck of it because they do have a purpose. Around 640 was the first coins, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And about 500 was the emergence of what they call the first city-states. What does that mean? Oh, hang on for a second. We've got the birth of three very important characters here. Around 428, 427, and not long after. And who they were these three characters. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. I'm going to be going back in a minute to tell you why these lines are important. Closer to our beginnings, around 300, Rome was kind of like, I don't know, it was the little kid on the block that was getting pushed around by everybody. Rome was the skinny guy on the beach who kept on getting sand thrown in his face. Rome was getting beaten up by a lot of neighboring countries. Actually, some scholars have wondered if it was because Rome was pushed around a lot at the front end that they later assumed some of their characteristics. I mean, who knows? Rome was sacked and burned by Gauls, G-A-U-L-S. And what Gauls were is they became what later became France. Goths, incidentally, were what later became sort of Germany. So, Rome sacked many times. Many times. Now, that says Greece under Macedonia, and I'm going to write this one last one before I start backtracking. So, I don't know how much you remember this from your grade 5 history classes. Greece under Macedonia. For our purposes, what we want to remember about this is that at the time, oh, how can I forgot Sicily, and there it is, Sicily. There was a lot of nations all over the world that were in the process of expanding, fighting, burning, living, dying. There was a zillion places all over the world where different things were happening. Different things were happening in India, different things were happening in Siberia, different things were happening in Africa. We're just sticking to the West here. And for the West, Greece was taken over by Macedonia. Now, here's the first piece. I'd like to read you this little quote. Greece's own political history, like anybody else, was filled with war, filled with diplomacy, it was filled with cruelty, it was filled with wonderful ideas, but it was the inner history. It was the history of thought and feeling and character that was so grand to early Greece. Early Greece, produced the Athens of Pericles and Plato. Who the heck is Pericles? There's a famous story about Pericles that kind of demonstrates what early Greece was up to. Early Greece. And there. 100 years-ish. So Pericles was a politician, and the story goes that after a day of really bad debates, Pericles was really severely heckled by this one fellow, and they had a terrible time in the Senate, and this heckler bugged Pericles, and in fact, when the session was over, Pericles is walking home, and this guy is still heckling him and bugging him and making it really difficult. So by the time that Pericles walks all the way home after a day of political wrangling with this guy hassling him all the way back, by the time Pericles gets home, it's dark. And the guy is still there, bugging him. What does Pericles do? He gets one of his own servants to light a lantern and light the guy's way home. Wonderful stories of egalitarianism, higher thought, strength, courage, integrity, honor, all of those things. This is kind of what you think of when you think of early Greece. Sort of in there. Now, Greece under Macedonia started something that the Romans later really picked up on, which was some of these huge, wonderful ideas about early Greece. And they were. There's no kidding about it. Now, we're going to return to that in a minute. In fact, I'm going to segregate this off. These three characters and kind of early Greece. So, we'll return to that in a minute. I left off at 275. 275 was the beginnings of empire. Okay, so 275, the very beginnings of empire. So what we've got is that Rome had originally been, just a tiny piece. Maybe I'll use red. Rome was just a small place, and at one time it occupied a territory maybe like that, tops. By 275, Rome had expanded, and it took up all of Italy. It didn't take up Sicily yet. But Rome had begun to expand and started to show some traits by 275 that were going to be defining traits through the rest of its development. People described things about Rome like this. Get a load of this. They talked about aggressive wars. Aggressive wars. Right? They talked about allies that were gained and assimilated. Allies that were gained and assimilated through aggressive wars, and who later became Roman citizens, kind of forced Roman citizens. They talk about, quote, the sagacity and aggressive selfishness of early Rome, and how Rome was beginning to be very brutal, merciless, unforgiving in their takeovers, very aggressive takeovers of that part of the world.